I'm Tammy Haddad. This is the Washington AI Network podcast, and we're here at the AI Expo, and I'm here with my dear friend Keith Strier from AMD. Let's hear it for him. That's right, because if anyone knows anything about chips, it's this man, the history, the industry, you know it all. I'm so glad to have you here. We hung out here last year at the AI Expo. You're back, and the whole world has changed in the last year.
Yeah.
So tell me what's ahead. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that to you.
That's not fair.
But what I am going to do is I do want you to talk about the history of the movement of chips, because now it's everything. We were together last night. Howard Lutnick was at the AI Expo, and he talks about chips, and he talked about wafers. I never thought I'd be there with the Commerce Secretary talking about it.
Yeah, it's a little unfair question because, I'm not an engineer.
That's right.
Not a chip designer.
That's all right.
And if I'm totally...
But you've been on the front lines of the industry.
I have for the last 6 years. But the first time I stepped into a data center and actually looked at a supercomputer was in 2019.
Okay.
So before 2019, I was focused on AI for a couple of years, but really chips didn't come into view until about 2017, 2018. But it's important to talk about it because when the world when AI became a mainstream topic, and this is my opinion, it was around 2016. And if you remember 2016, that was the year in January in Davos that the World Economic Forum released that white paper on the fourth industrial revolution. Right. And they kind of coined this term like, hey, we're in this new industrial revolution, this new era. AI wasn't the only topic in that, but AI was really the one that grabbed everyone's imagination. And throughout that year, a number of things happened. That's when Google flew to South Korea and AlphaGo beat the Sodal on that famous Go game. And that was almost an alarm. That actually set off alarms all across the world that maybe this AI thing is a little bigger than we thought, and so forth. So a bunch of things happened that year. That's when sort of AI hit my radar. And shortly after that, I made the observation, well, okay, everyone's excited about AI and models and so forth, but you really can't have AI without computers. And people don't seem to be paying attention that much to computing. It was sort of a dismissive topic. Oh yeah, computers are easy. You just get that from the cloud. People really weren't thinking about it. So that's kind of when it hit my radar.
I see. Okay, so let's talk about the cloud, because the cloud changed everything.
Cloud changed everything. Nothing is democratized access to computing and really just sort of technology as the public cloud, right? And I think it was as the story famously goes, it was an engineer at AWS, right, who said to Jeff, hey, we got some extra computing capacity, maybe we should monetize this, and that was like, 2007, 2008, and so that changed the world in many, many, many ways. And so we love the cloud, but, computing isn't one thing. And one of the observations I made is that everyone sort of has this impression that computing is infinite and it's easy. And that's only true for some kind of computing. It's not true for all computing. And obviously, the more advanced the computing gets, the more finite it gets, the more complex it gets.
Okay, so we were together also. People think we're going to travel the world together. We don't. But we were at the AI Summit today together at the Grand Palais.
Oh, in Paris, yes.
Yes, and there were so many people there from around the world. It wasn't just technologists.
That's right.
It wasn't just companies. It was, the civil society groups, you name it. They were all there. So now this has gone from the last thing you talk about AI to everything, to this expo that we're in right now.
Yeah.
And how does that change what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation initially with AI was pretty science-y. It was just really, really nerding out on really cool models and how they could do cool things and solve complex problems. But that's just not the conversation today. That still happens. There are still, a lot of nerdy conversations happening, but it's obviously much more complex and more nuanced now. And you have to have a really good conversation about AI, you have to involve all those different groups. And actually, I think President Biden did a pretty good job when he built the National AI Committee at the U.S. I served on that committee. I met Ely at that committee. And it was, reasonably balanced between sort of civil society, industry, that kind of government, had, different sort of factions to kind of get all those voices in the room, right? And that's kind of the conversation is a multi-voice, it's a multi-stakeholder conversation. The world is not necessarily always good at that,
right?
But that is what it is.
So not to get political, but now we have a new president.
Yes.
And Illy, by the way, remember, worked for President Trump.
Yes, he did.
And put together the National Security AI Initiative, right? So now we've got states, we've got countries, We've got federal guidelines that members who we saw last night, members of Congress, are working on. We don't have any answers. So how do you move ahead when the industry is just struggling to know what's coming?
Yeah.
Not know what's coming in the AI. That's all another conversation. But know what's coming in terms of regulation, how you work in each, like I said, in each individual state or country.
So you referenced the National Security Commission on AI, and that is a underappreciated document. Ely was the head of that. Of course, that was sponsored and I think catalyzed by Eric Schmidt himself and a number of other people. And that document was hundreds and hundreds of pages. But if you just read the first, say, 10 pages or whatever, the executive summary, that doc, and I don't remember exactly when that came out, right? It was a good 4 or 5 years ago. That became the basis on which I think a lot of our conversations today and legislation and the actions that are being taken, even President Trump's EO on AI, a lot of that you can look back and trace it back to the content in that original document. So that was a really, really seminal piece of work, frankly. And it also opened the country's eyes to frankly, the risks of not doing this well, right? It's not just, hey, we need to do AI because it's beneficial, it's a good thing. But if we don't, then in this broader context of strategic competition, right? And not just with China, but just with countries in general, and just and you look at the title of our little session, right? The new calculus for competition. What leads to competitive anything? Whether it's a country, whether it's a student competing for getting into a school. I mean, the nature of competition is changing because we have this ability to simulate and scale human-like cognition. That changes everything, right? And that document was one of the first documents that very definitively said, if you don't do this well, it puts our country at risk. I mean, really, no one had said that clearly. So that was the beginning. So where we are today, right? And I think Trump, the first administration, the Biden administration, now, the new Trump administration have continued the momentum, thankfully, of leadership, and Michael Kratsios coming back, and Lynn Parker, and all these great people coming back into the government. We have to lead. Right. We just have to, right? And we have to do it in not just computing. We have to lead in computing, but we have to lead in energy production. We have to lead in the responsible deployment of AI, being mindful of the risks. I mean, you just have to lead in every possible way.
So you're obviously at AMD leading the way, and you're not speaking on behalf of the company, but just to the point, again, the Commerce Secretary mentioned last night, power. Are you seeing changes in power so that there's enough power out there to make things move and to advance?
Are we talking about power or electricity power?
Now I'm talking about electricity power.
Okay.
What I'm really talking about is, are the systems in place to support the AI that's being developed? Because even last week, Keith, just think of the announcements from the hyperscalers.
Yeah, they're huge. So it used to be when you talked about data centers, you talked about 100 megawatts as being big.
Right.
In fact, my colleague Thomas, who's not here, Thomas Zakaria, who's a fellow SVP at AMD, who used to run Oak Ridge National Labs, so one of the most prestigious, important labs, and oversees the big computer systems like Frontier. He tells a story that, because he'd been there many, many years, and he tells a story how I think around 2000 he pitched his boss at Oak Ridge like, hey, I need 20 megawatts. And the guy's like, you're crazy. I mean, who could possibly use up 20 megawatts for computing, And he's like, anyway, he tells that great story. And of course, today, we talk about 500 megawatt, gigawatt data centers, multi-gigawatt AI campuses. We're at an order magnitude.
Ran out of words, right? You need more words.
Now it's something that's above a gigawatt, but you have these mega AI complexes, okay? And just to give it perspective, 1 gigawatt data center is equal to a nuclear power plant. One nuclear power plant powers 40,000 homes, right? So 40,000 homes to one building powering essentially one cluster of computing capability. And we're talking about multiple of them, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is interesting. Now, in the world today, only 3 of those have been announced. You can call them Stargate level, okay? Right. Stargate is sort of the term, right, that OpenAI coined, right? There's 3. There's one in Abu Dhabi, there's one here in Texas, and there's one in Paris. And I'll put it this way. If you look at the whole planet and you look at some very important geopolitical distinctions, you have things like, how many nuclear countries do we have? And I think it's 9. Is that correct? I think about 9 countries, right? Okay, so that's 9 countries, and it took 50 years to achieve that. If you look at how many countries can launch a rocket that can break escape velocity into the outer atmosphere, It's 12. Okay, it took 60 years, and we have. Well, actually, I'm sorry, it took more than that. 100 years essentially from first flight. But we have 12 countries that can launch a rocket. That's it, right? Well, in the span of 18 months, we went from 0 to 3 countries that will have Stargates.
Wow.
And the chances are there'll be at least 3 to 5 more in the next year announced. So, but every country won't have a Stargate. So maybe 10 or 12 countries will be able to have the energy, the overall resources to accommodate a Stargate scale data center, right? So it's going to be at that level. And so, yes, at the end of the day, having that kind of infrastructure, the energy, the data centers, the computing, the ecosystem around it, this will be very determinative going forward.
I went to the GTC conference this year, and your old employer, and I was shocked by the amount of people there. And I was more shocked because 3 of the people I met, maybe it says something more about me, were pipe fitters from different oil companies.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
So, I expected technology students and all of that. So are the industries working together?
Yeah.
Are you going to these, massive companies and smaller companies who are, LNG, you name it, and saying, hey guys, we got to work together on this.
That's right. Yeah. So let's talk about it. Let me start with NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is an important company, and I joined NVIDIA in 2019 after going to the GTC in 2018.
Okay.
So and I actually met Jensen. He wouldn't remember that, but I met him at the time, and then of course a year later I ended up working for him. But it was very clear in 2018 that he had a very comprehensive vision for the world as it relates to end-to-end AI infrastructure, and the rest of the world was waking up to it, but he was first. Mm-hmm. And when I joined in 2019, what I then learned is that he was also leaning into industries, right? And they were public about it, but not everyone was paying attention,
right?
Because no one cared about NVIDIA in 2009,
right?
Okay, but the NVIDIA not only was focused on AI, but they're focused on AI for industry, and so there was an oil and gas group. There was an energy team, there was a life science team, there was an auto team, and I ran public sector, right? I was hired to build the global public sector and the sovereign AI, right, as you know it today. And so there were different industries. Of course, that now we just expect that, but that's why you ran into people like that there. So the industries are absolutely leaning in. They have to, right? It's the future of industry.
No, I think that's true. So let's talk about governments. Yeah. How do you deal with all the different governments? You're going around the world every week.
Yeah. So again, going back to 2000, every conversation.
Are they asking you, hey, what's going on in the U.S.? What's the latest?
So here's where the conversation started. If you go back in time to 2019, when I started on this journey, the first conversation every country had in the world on what is the GPU and how to use it started with me. And I had those conversations. They were really simple conversations. It went like this. Who are you again? Okay. NVIDIA? Is that a gaming company? I think my grandson uses that company. And what's the GPU? Right. Okay. That's how every conversation went, right? Because no one really knew. No one really cared. So, a lot of those...
And no one believed him in the industry,
one believed him, right? No one believed it. There was no urgency.
Right.
Okay. So from 2019 to 2020 to November of 2020, well, no, we'll go all the way to the spring of 2023. Essentially, in that time period, all those conversations were friendly, informational. There was momentum building, but no fire was lit. You know what lit the fire?
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
Right.
Okay. So when ChatGPT hit, right, that hit in November of 2022. 2 weeks later, and this is just a coincidence, I happened to be at a meeting called the OECD Digital Ministerial, which happens every few years. They bring all the ministers of digital together. This was in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, and ChatGPT was not on the agenda. But when I showed up to the meeting, it's the only thing they want to talk about. I think this was like December 6th. So again, 2 weeks later.
Right.
It was completely dominant. In fact, when Carme, the Secretary of State of Digital for Spain, opened up the meeting, she literally opened up with, have you used ChatGPT yet? So it was a dominant. I came back from that meeting and I sent an email to the leadership team and I said, I think this is bigger than we think it is.
Right.
I said, this is the only thing people want to talk about.
Because it was understandable to everyone.
It was relatable. It was easy.
Right.
If you look at the laws of diffusion and you look at what leads to the rapid laws of diffusion, right? It's this, you make something accessible, relatable, easy to use. There's certain things you do. OpenAI crushed it. And so they put a really simple interface and a really complex technology. They made it free. And everyone was like, it took off, right? And you know how that goes. 100 million people in 60 days or whatever it was. And I think as of today, they have 600-700 million users a week. It's crazy, right? The adoption level is fast. But it did blow the hinges off of our imagination as to, wow, I guess this is actually a real thing. This isn't maybe not a toy,
Right.
not a game. People could see the future. Actually, Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box, who I do not know, but I respect, and I read what he writes. And he has this great quote. He goes, when he experienced ChatGPT, it felt like that rare moment when you could actually potentially see the future even before the future's arrived. You know, and I agree with him. That's how I felt. Obviously, Jensen felt the same way. And he made his famous quote in early February of, I think that's what it was, that, this is the iPhone moment of AI,
Right.
and then everything changed, right? And so frankly, to answer your question, up until that moment, the conversations were friendly and easy. After ChatGPT, in the spring of 2023, there was a fire, right? And there was real urgency, and people were in a mad rush to buy GPUs, which was a good thing. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, good for your business.
Good for the business.
Yes.
Yeah, so things scaled very fast from there. And then, that's how history is written. I mean, basically, it went from a couple $100 million to tens of billions like that as far as government sales go. And every country went from, okay, AI is important, glad we have some policies, to holy cow, we need to scale. And that's what led to where we are.
Okay. So by the way, for those in the audience, just so you know, the audience it's called a silent audience. They're wearing headsets, but they're nodding and they're cheering again, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they're here. And we are going to come, and if you see that microphone over there, you can ask Keith questions. But this is my question for you now. What is the craziest thing anyone ever offered you for a GPU, either at NVIDIA or at AMD? Doesn't everyone want to know that? What's the craziest thing you were ever offered? Where do they want to take you out to dinner? What tickets did they offer you? Did you get a car?
No.
A house?
It wasn't that they offered me something. It was more of just an awkward moment.
Okay.
I was very new to NVIDIA, and I had not totally clued into how. This is more of a gaming thing than a country thing.
Okay.
I have two answers to the question. So first, I was very new, and I was wearing an NVIDIA backpack. It is a true story. I was standing in front of the White House because I was actually in Washington, D.C., and I had my NVIDIA backpack, and a young boy came up to me and pulled on my backpack. I mean, he couldn't have been more than 12. And I turn around, and I look at this kid, and he goes, "Sir, do you work for NVIDIA?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Can you get me a GPU?"
No.
I'm like, "I don't even know who you are, and you're asking me for a $600 gaming GPU." He's like, "Is there any way?" It was so sweet,
Right.
It was so innocent, but I didn't realize how impactful the logo was on my backpack until this kid pulled on my backpack. Is there any way you get? So that was first off. But now jump ahead a couple of years. Now we're in the post ChatGPT craziness, and I have to be careful. I'm not going to mention the name of the country, but there was one country in Asia. It was not China. That went from not having any interest in GPUs to having true urgency, and the prime minister of that country sent a note to Jensen and just basically said, "You must give us GPUs," and you must and insisted on a letter where basically we agreed to give them whatever they needed, And honestly, I thought at the time, our answer was very balanced and responsible. I said, "Look, we are happy to work with you, and we want to responsible. When the purchase order comes in, we'll fulfill it." But it was a very strange letter because it was almost like, "Please give us GPUs," And I was like, "Of course, we didn't even know what to say,
Right.
But I think it was indicative of this sense of urgency at the time that what if we can't get what we need? And honestly, I think NVIDIA and AMD in the industry have stepped up really well, and I don't think many countries are necessarily we're not the problem.
Right.
Okay. It's a resource issue. There's an energy issue, but it's not the chip industry. We're not failing to provide the chips they need. Are they ready? Do they actually have readiness to take them and use them and scale them? That's the bigger issue.
Right. You should talk about that a little, because I don't think for people that aren't deep in the industry, what you need to make those GPUs work.
Yeah. I mean, these are the most complex things in the world, right? I mean, we're talking about things, the size of the palm of your hand that have hundreds of billions of transistors that only work inside a machine. I mean, people focus on the chip, right? But the computer has tens of thousands of parts, right? You have incredibly complex interconnect and high bandwidth memory, and obviously CPUs and GPUs and so forth. And it's no longer just even about the server. It's about the entire data center as a computer, and them connecting up and operating at unbelievable scale. the amount of capability and technology and expertise you need to operate these systems is mind-blowing,
Right.
which is why CoreWeave, that went public this year, and the only thing that they do is stand up and manage large-scale clusters, and they're worth nearly $50 billion today. And that's all that they do. So this is a hard thing to do.
Right. But it's also reminded that there are so few people in industry. Back to your earlier example, there's like 3 companies, 2 people. Hey guys, you guys need to get into this business. It's unbelievable. Okay, if you have a question, please walk up to the microphone.
Yeah.
If you would, we should put this on and for any questions that are coming in.
Yeah, I think look, designing chips is one thing, manufacturing them at scale, at the quality needed, the yield needed to do it, which is why TSMC is so powerful and well-regarded company. It's because, it's super hard to do.
Right.
You could throw lots of money at it, and that's not a bad thing, but that does not guarantee you success. And that's why there's really not that many places that can do it.
So in these early months of the Trump administration and the announcements that have been made of companies working in the U.S., will that speed things up? I don't mean for the U.S., but overall for the industry. Oh, we're going to get to you next.
Yeah. Look, it's actually been really good. I mean, the Trump administration policies on a few different fronts have been very welcomed by our industry, right? I mean, the delay on the AI diffusion rules was very welcome. I know there's going to be more rules, clearly,
right?
But the way that they were written was not really welcome to most of us. We didn't think that they were productive. The executive orders on AI and publication and literacy, huge. They just frankly should have been done 2 years ago.
Right.
So yeah. I mean, we're pretty supportive of the movement so far.
Okay, sir, can you please say your name and your affiliation?
Sure, Daniel Ben-Aim, Middle East Institute.
Okay, great. Hi.
Hi, thanks so much. I just wanted to ask a question because it's a question that I think is driving a lot of the policy debate around the engagements in the Middle East about where we are when it comes to cutting-edge chips with relation to China. How far ahead does AMD feel like it is compared to Huawei Ascend and some of the others who are making the kinds of chips that you would ultimately be competing with in the chips that you design and sell around the world? What is that gap? Are you worried that does China have the capacity to actually export the kinds of cutting-edge chips that it has, or are they all needed domestically? How do you see that picture?
Well, first off, I am not qualified to answer your first question. So I'm not a chip engineer, and I've never evaluated Huawei's chips, so I couldn't possibly tell you if they're good, better, or worse, or almost close to ours. I couldn't tell you. What I can tell you is that I'm not sure it matters. And I've said this, and other people have said this. I'm not the sole holder of this opinion, but the performance of chips matter. Okay, and I'm referring to like the actual efficiency and the amount of intelligence that can be produced by a chip. Geopolitically, it matters if money and carbon matter to you. What do I mean by that? That means if you're at a company and you're operating on a budget and you're competing with other companies on a budget, then yeah, you need the most efficient performant chips you can get your hands on. If you care about the environment or you're a country and you want to have a green economy and you don't want to just burn coal and so forth, then yes, the efficiency of those data centers matter, right? But if you don't care about money, let's just say money's not the issue and you can spend as much as you need and you don't really care about lighting up a few more fat coal plants and efficiency is not the main issue, then the performance of the individual chip matters less. Because if I need 3 chips or 4 chips or 5 less efficient chips to achieve the performance goal that I need, and that costs me more money and more coal, that's fine. It's so in a geopolitical context, that's different than an economic context, and that's where I'm not sure it matters.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Chris Russo. That's Chris Russo from Haddad Media. Thank you, Chris Russo, for being here.
Yes, Chris Russo from Haddad Media. And last night we had an event with Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, and he was talking about embracing our allies in the chips race. So I think it was kind of an answer to a response to the recent Middle Eastern summit. I think maybe talking across both companies, your former employer and now, has that been your motto previously, or is there a new push for that to embrace our allies?
Yeah, I think both NVIDIA and AMD are U.S. companies that are loyal to the U.S. I don't think there's any question about that. At the same time, the semiconductor industry, and this includes Intel and Qualcomm and Broadcom, have been actively selling into the Chinese market for many years. It is the second biggest market in the world. It's an important market. It's only become complicated recently. Up until recently, it was not complicated in a sense. It was just another important market. So I can tell you that at NVIDIA, I did not travel to China ever. So I haven't been there since 2018 because I was, very focused on serving the allies. That was the nature of the project. So the AI Nations program was an allied program, and I assume it still is today. I'm not there, but that was the nature of it. So we did not focus on China, and I don't focus on China at AMD either. So China is a discrete market, that gets served discretely, but I've never personally focused on it. And so all the things that I've done and the very nature of sovereign AI, its genesis was in working with the allies, quite frankly. So that's what I can say on that.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
Keith, we've run out of time. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation.
That's been almost 30
minutes. It's been 30 minutes. Let's hear it from Keith Strier from AMD. Great work. And I want to talk to you about a GPU. I'd like to give my son in the front row on the way.
You have to talk in my bag first.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks again. Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for being here at the AI Expo.